Reading great literature is one of the most powerful ways people can change their thinking. Reading the great works of philosophers, academics, and thinkers can give you truths about the nature of man and the natural world. In my personal quest for political and philosophical understanding, I tried to find good books, but there are so many out there it would be impossible to read even a fraction of famous works. When I tried to find a reading list, I found that most recommendations were persuasive books. They would be books about the issue of the day, explaining why this policy is right and this one is wrong. I found this rather short-sighted, as they taught you what to think and not how to think. I have found that most people who are misguided about an issue are usually not evil or unintelligent, but they simply frame the problem wrong. The text in each of these lists gives an example of how to understand and think about ideas. This is less a list about what to believe, but messages about how to frame how you think about them. Each of the books are designed to be read in order, building on one another. Many of these books are long and have many concepts. I chose most of these books with one or two messages from the books in mind, although there's a lot more to learn than just the ideas that made me include them. I will be doing a video series explaining the important messages I'm trying to convey with each of these readings, and explaining some of the concepts in each of these books. If you don't want to buy any of these books, you can watch the video and I'll give you an overview, but the primary sources will be far more insightful than just me summarizing them. I will also be giving spoilers for each book, so read them before the video if you care about that sort of thing. There are a lot of philosophy books, so it's probably less of a concern, but you may want to hear the concepts from the author first. Apologies that these are all different lengths, reading difficulties, and entertainment value. The problem with knowledge and truth is that it doesn't come in a neat, tidy package. Any set of learning materials will be considered politically slanted by some, and I have not been afraid to put in books that have politically slanted opinions. You may not agree with all of these books. Some of these books don't even agree with each other. But often, you learn just as much from what you disagree with as from the things that you already accept. I hope you can learn something about how to frame problems. This is all about the fundamental ideas behind the problem. Questions and ideas that you need to consider to form your own conclusion, whether that agrees with the author or not. Here is the list of books I will be going over. In the description I will give the translation I read for the older books on this list, such as Plato and Aristotle, who wrote it originally in ancient Greek. Most of the translations I read were more literal translations. I can't really tell you how different translations compare in quality, as I have not read other versions. How Not to Be Wrong, The Power of Mathematical Thinking, by Jordan Ellenberg. This book is about the same overall idea that this list is trying to get across. It's all about thinking about things logically and framing them correctly. This book talks about thinking mathematically, which is an extremely useful way to frame ideas. The other big point is the idea that many problems need to be thought of in non-linear ways. The story of the bullet holes in the airplanes shows the problem that many people fall into. Many people frame issues wrong, and that's how they come to incorrect conclusions. Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle. The golden mean of virtues in Nicomachean Ethics proves an important point. The key to virtue is about balance. Too much or too little of any virtue is a vice. Too little courage is cowardice, and too much is foolhardiness. And the right amount is courage. It is a mistake to believe that morality always comes in absolute values. This is what fundamentalists of all types fall into. This kind of non-linear thinking is often needed to frame an issue. The best solution is not always to get to one point of the extreme or the other, but often to balance the razor's edge between two different ideas. Where that perfect balance may be debatable, and often is different for different people or different situations. That is what is needed to be found out. Some solutions have no ultimate goal, but the constant balancing act between two values. It is also a good explanation of virtues as well. Understanding of virtue ethics is a good way to judge good action and good character. It makes you think about what is virtue, and what looks like virtue but is not, something most people never do. Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes. Politics is designed to solve the biggest problems we face. It is one of the least understood topics by most people, and connected to many other fields. It's also the thing I know most about, and probably an interest of most of the people watching this video. So this is the primary lens this reading list will be looking through. So although the purpose of this reading list is not directly political, that will be the example we will use to frame thinking. The next few entries are about the nature of government. To understand the nature of government, first you must understand why government is needed. Hobbes gives the reason why we form governments and justifies its existence even when it abuses people. While most people would disagree at how he forms government, he gives the best reasoning for why we need government. The formation of why we need governments in the West is based on Hobbes' theory, so even if you disagree with his analysis, this is the explanations our governments are formulated upon if you live in the West. You should know the reasoning behind its creation. Understanding the reasoning behind the existence of any system is necessary in order to frame your thinking about that system. The First and Second Treatise on Government by John Locke. Locke explains in his book what the role of government is. Hobbes justifies the existence of government, but Locke explains a new way it should be formulated. He explains the necessity of restraining the state and the exact role the government should fulfill. This gives a solution to the necessity of the state while not needing Hobbes' absolute monarchy. He defines what he sees as the legitimate role of government and what the role of government is not. The United States is founded upon Locke's ideas of government. Again, even if you don't like him, you need to understand him to understand the original philosophy behind the American government. A key way to frame your thinking about a system is defining the role and limitations that should be placed on that system. With the role of that system defined, you get a clearer picture of how things should be formed. He also defines liberalism. Most people don't understand liberalism as a philosophical structure, yet it's the defining philosophy of the West and makes up most of our social structure. 1984 by George Orwell. Now that we understand why we need government, let's look at how the government can be the greatest source of pain and evil in a society. The book 1984 is the single best representation of authoritarianism in fiction, at least in my view. Orwell's nightmare is dark, complex, and believable. He shows how dangerous a totalitarian government can be and just how easy it would be to get there. It shows the nature of control and it helps you recognize it. It also gives a good set of vocabulary on authoritarianism and the tools it uses to maintain itself. Recognizing the danger of governments, or really any other power structure, can pose helps understanding what governments can do and when they go too far. When you think about how something should be, you should consider where it can go wrong. You should also learn to recognize the symptoms of a corrupt system, as it may not be obvious to those inside of it. The Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers are a set of documents by some of the founding fathers about the Constitution and the reasoning behind it. Understanding why the Constitution was made how it was is important to understanding how America should be run. The lack of direct democracy, the slowness of government, and the inconsistencies between state laws are all criticisms that have been levied against the Constitution. Yet every one of them are intentional consequences of how the Constitution is structured. The Constitution is a well thought out document, and if people are going to have an opinion on public policy, they should understand why the government works the way it does. Understanding the motivations of a creator of a system or item should be considered when deciding how to change or interact with it. The Constitution is also the most essential political document, and all other American government and laws are subject to it. 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. I wanted to find a book about psychology for this list. Understanding how we think and act is fundamental in framing thinking. I debated including several books. Thinking Fast and Slow is a good book, but I found the message too similar to that of The Power of Mathematical Thinking, and it was not as well formulated for the objective of this list. I thought about including work from Freud, Jung, and Skinner, but each one of them didn't have a good work that encapsulated the ideas that are applicable to framing understanding, in a way that fits this list. I've also not gone through all of their work, though. Jordan Peterson's book illustrates fundamental truths about human thought and how it applies to real life. To me, it is less of a list of hard and fast rules, but more of an understanding of how humans think and suggestions on how to navigate these essential systems of human nature. We are all constrained by the fact that we are all human, so we must understand the systems behind the human mind. How can we frame our thinking without understanding how our brain formulates our thoughts? Each one of these rules gives some usable insight into our own ideas and behavior. It is not directly a psychology book, but it fits the purposes I need. The Cobra Effect. The Cobra Effect is an interesting story about the idea of incentives. Every policy creates incentives, and they are often not what is intended. In creating rules and laws, what incentives those create needs to be considered. If not, they will often do more harm than good. This is not a book, but more of a short story. For this one, you can just watch the link down in the description or just look it up by yourself. The Road to Serfdom by Friedrich Hayek. There are two main schools of thought on economics currently, classical and Keynesian. The most influential proponent of classical economics was Friedrich Hayek. You don't need to agree with every argument he makes, and his inclusion was not meant to tell people what to believe. His writing is important because he outlines why the free market works. If people want to change the market either personally or via public policy, they need to understand the potential damage or help that can be done and why. The Wealth of Nations was my first choice of explaining the nature of markets. That book is long and extremely difficult to read. I think most people would have a hard time getting anything useful out of it. I have also never read it whole, and I'm not going to include a book I don't have a full understanding of. I already think Leviathan is more difficult than I would like, but I don't have a good alternative to that one. Understanding markets is understanding nearly all voluntary interactions, and it's a good way to frame many situations. On Liberty by John Stuart Mill. I will not lie, On Liberty has a clear objective. It is a short text and has the single goal of promoting liberty and the ability for the individual to act as they please regardless of the majority opinion. While I agree with this position largely, I know it's not without its critics. I chose this because of how he talks about the importance of debating ideas. It helps not only because you can show that an idea is wrong, but it is important even if that idea is right. If you never have to defend your opinion, you will never be good at it. So if somebody comes along and challenges it, your defense will be weak. Also, if you're not forced to analyze your position, you will not know why it is important. You will take it for granted and eventually stop caring about it. This sort of critical analysis of ideas is necessary for testing or strengthening any idea you may hold. The questioning and debating mindset is a good way of strengthening the way you think about ideas. Plato's Republic. Plato's Republic is a good reflection on human nature and the proper response to it. There are a few major points to take from it, although they're not explicitly stated. It shows the inherent conflict between human nature and ideal justice. If you try to pursue perfect justice, or a world entirely ideal in any virtue, you will inevitably lead to a nightmare. After all of these great works, this one is an important one to read. You have to consider how the nature of man fights against and is often at odds with what we consider perfect good. It often gives lessons on how we should think and act. What parts of us should govern our whole? The last major point we need to focus on is the allegory in the cave. It illustrates the process of enlightenment. It shows us that even if we were to know everything, others would still fight against you. It shows us how to teach others. After you have read all sorts of things, you may want to enlighten others. And if you wish to do so, understand that people will not always be perfectly receptive. To me, I see it as a warning and a lesson for those who wish to translate their knowledge into policy and action. A key thing to keep in mind, and that's why I have it near the end. Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx. I'm sure you will find this as an odd choice. Its position at the end is even stranger. I chose this book to portray a more abstract idea. I chose it because it goes against my fundamental principles. I think it is dangerous and wrong. The ideas from this book have led to 100 million deaths. I chose it because I disagree with it. I've read the book several times for school and some for personal reading. The point is, after you've read books to help define your understanding, you need to read the ideas behind the people you disagree with the most, for they have books that affect their thinking. The choice of books should probably be different for you. Maybe your book is Mein Kampf, or Beyond Good and Evil, or Second Sex. Choose the keystone work of those you disagree with the most. Although I doubt you loved all of the works I included on this list, I think most of you are open to seeing the point the author is trying to make. But you should read books you have a real opposition to, because it's never as simple as hating every word they utter. The thing is, for how much I disagree with the Communist Manifesto, it is right in a number of things it says. You can agree with somebody about everything except for one fact, and that can completely change your worldview. The most dangerous books don't tell lies, but half-truths. Find out what you can agree with in the book, and what you disagree with, and why. Learn from your enemies in both their successes and failures. I would recommend a more fundamental philosophy behind ideas, so to try to trace where ideas come from. I've given you books to help frame your own thinking. But if you get in an argument with somebody, you need to know not only how to frame your own thinking, but how the other person frames theirs. Your opinion is worth half as much if you do not understand what you are arguing against. Hopefully you will integrate some of these lessons into your thinking. If you have trouble applying any of these ideas, try this. Ask how the lesson from each of these books applies to the topic, problem, or idea you're thinking about. Then use the principles you have learned from each book to work through that question. These are a lot of vague ideas, so I don't expect you to easily solve all your problems. But I think some of these lessons can help. I hope you like my reading list. If you have any books that helped frame your thinking, I would love for you to put them down below. I may update this or come up with another one if I find some ways to improve it significantly.